What's a family secret you found out by accident that flipped your whole view on life? Story 1. I always knew my Uncle Jerry as a kid. He was a cool guy, but mostly a stranger who lived a few hours away from us and would only visit once every year or so. We were really close with the rest of the extended family, so this was a bit weird, but I never really thought about it. It wasn't until later that I realized that Uncle Jerry was much older than my dad, who was allegedly my grandparents' oldest child. Turns out Uncle Jerry was my grandmother's teen pregnancy, who she had given up for adoption and had reconnected with us when I was a baby. It was back in the day when these things were covered up, so she had gone off to the country to live with her older sister while she was pregnant, and came home later, so even most of her brothers and sisters didn't even know. Apparently, it was a big shock when he came back into our lives, but they all welcomed him. He was lucky and had been adopted by a wonderful family. Now he's just Uncle Jerry, who pops in now and then and sends Christmas candy every year. Answer: I have a brother like that. Mom gave her first kid up for adoption at 17. He got adopted by a nice Jewish family in NYC. His parents passed away, and he went looking for his biological mom. Well, he found us, and now I have another much older brother. It's nuts, because I look nothing like my full brother, but could practically be identical twins with my half-brother. Story 2. This is a very personal story. I am legally blind. I have been since I was like 2. Multiple surgeries, lots of hospital time, retina specialists, etc. throughout my whole life. My parents told me how I lost my sight was that I cried a lot when you were a baby. And that's it. In adulthood, when I would go to the retinal doctor, they'd ask how it happened and I'd tell them, well, I guess I cried a lot. They were skeptical. Well, 2 decades after my mother died, and right after my father died, I was told the real story by 2 different extended family members. My mother was always an alcoholic. That part I knew. What I didn't know was that when I was a baby, yes, I cried, and my mother would bang my head on the floor to stop me from crying. It destroyed my retinas. This was confirmed with an unrelated MRI I had done in 2021, where the note said something about a perinatal insult, so both my parents took that little tidbit to their graves. Thanks, guys. Love ya. Answer: I have somewhat similar story. I have a huge scar on my chest and some smaller ones on my shoulders and arms. My whole life I've been told that when I was 1 or 2 yo, I pulled tablecloth with freshly poured coffee that spilled all over me and basically melted the clothes I was wearing with my skin. I have no idea what material, but I believe it because the scar on my left arm ends in straight line by my wrist. My mother was there. She just turned around and I was fast. They rushed me to the hospital, skin plastic surgery, saved my life, no permanent problems, the best result that could be achieved. I never had problems with mother for this. Accidents happen, people aren't perfect, and like I said, no permanent issues. Except my mother used to be an alcoholic when I was a toddler, which I didn't know until 2018 when Dad died, and she fell into it again. That's when my older siblings started telling me all the things I had no idea about. And one of them was, of course, that she poured the coffee and then forgot about it because she was tipsy. I pulled the tablecloth while she was in bed tipsy, and it was Dad who saved me. In the end, your injury is way worse, and I am so sorry for you. Sending virtual hugs 3. Story 3. My grandfather lost his mother as a child, and it was always a sensitive topic for him, but every time I'd ask how it happened, I was told that she was very sick and eventually passed away. When I was about 15 years old and had a reproductive health talk with my mother, we touched on the topic of abortion, and then she let slip that my great-grandmother actually died of consequences of a back alley abortion gone wrong. At that time, abortion was illegal where we're from, and she decided to go through with it. because my great-grandfather was an abusive alcoholic and a cheater who subjected her to marital violation, and she couldn't support the children she already had. What's worse, he later married one of the women he cheated with, and they had more children. That woman then proceeded to abuse my 4-year-old grandfather and his sister, for instance, by starving them and tying them to the kitchen table while she fed her children. The kicker was, they all lived in the same village, just a few houses from each other, and the local tipsy I'd sometimes see while visiting my grandpa. And grandma was actually my great-grandfather, with whom my grandpa cut all ties, so he never even got to know. Even my mother, let alone me. It was really shocking to find that out at that age, and I think it really pushed me forward in advocating for women's rights. Answer: my grandmother had a similar type of husband. She ended up giving 2 of their children up for adoption to save their lives. She only kept my mom because he abandoned her while she was pregnant with my mom. Definitely a blessing in disguise that he left and never came back. She was able to get a divorce in his absence when my mom was just over a year old. My mom never knew him and only found out he had died when she was about 18 because she was trying to get a copy of her birth certificate. Story 4. Found out my uncle was actually my half-brother. Dad had a kid before meeting my mom, and no one ever told me. Explains a lot about weird family dynamics growing up. Story 5. My grandmother, the uber-judgmental Christian, gave birth to my father exactly 9 months to the day after they married. When they passed away, we emptied their home and found an old safe. It had smelly money in it, the deed to their home and the marriage certificate, dated a whole month after they claimed to have gotten married. She actually had the audacity to criticize and find my mother wanting because she, too, was pregnant before marriage. Answer: a similar thing happened to my mom. When she was dying, I was helping her to sort out paperwork and photos, etc. Her parents' marriage certificate appeared. I worked it out that her mom had been 3 months pregnant when they married. Shock, horror. My mom was livid. She'd never been told. She asked her younger sister and she knew all about it. My mom never got over that. Bless her heart. Story 6. I found out my mom was one of the Tennessee Children's Home Society stolen babies, Google Georgia Tan. She and her sister were taken by this woman, and their parents were tricked into signing away their parental rights with promises of sending the girls to excellent schools and other lies. Both of the girls were taken to different states and literally sold to new parents. It was called adoption, but it was a black market baby ring. My mom found all of this out when I was 15, many years ago. My mom abandoned me and my 2 older brothers when I was very small, and my dad raised us, thank God. Over time, I came to understand that my mom had been badly abused by her adoptive mother and was mentally ill, in part from the abuse. I'm the only girl, so I've always resented her for leaving me and for not having a mom. So unfortunately, by the time I understood all that my mom had been through, she had already passed away. There's a lot more to it than that, but that's the Reader's Digest version. It's a lot to carry around. Story 7. My mother, who looked down on divorced women and constantly made disparaging remarks about my divorce, was actually divorced before she met my father. Story 8. I was in college and broke up with my boyfriend, BC. I found out he slept with my friend. Cried for weeks to my mom over the double betrayal. A couple months go by, and eventually I find out my mom is bisexual, which is totally fine. The problem is that I found out that said friend not only banged my BF, but had also been sleeping with my mom for several months. This caused a huge rift as they dated for about a decade. She only recently apologized for choosing former friend over her daughter. Story 9. On a random day, I realized that my mother's biggest hater is her own family, and that's the day I realized that, but their family means nothing. Answer. A buddy of mine started dating this girl when we were in HS, and her folks were always super hostile. He figured that they simply didn't like him, probably because he was banging their daughter. They continued to date in college, and her parents continued to take every opportunity to interfere with their relationship. They eventually got married, and then the real her came out. She was a freaking nightmare, hostile, controlling, used intimacy as a weapon, the whole bit. Unfortunately, he was a doormat, and it took 10 years and at least 2 prolonged affairs for him to divorce her. After the divorce, he was dropping their kid off at his ex's mom's, and they had a long discussion about the ex, and she said something along the lines of, "Well, we did try to warn you about her." All the time he thought they didn't like him. It was their daughter they didn't like, and were trying to save him from himself. Story 10. Grandpa was closeted his entire life. He knew all of the local power players and big deals because he was the manager of the menswear department at the fanciest department store in town. I still remember walking around downtown with him. He could never make it more than a block without someone wanting to stop and chat. My uncle is also gay, and because our city isn't very big, there was a very limited queer scene when he came out in the 80s. The family found out because he started hearing a lot of, "Oh, you're so-and-so, I know your father, wink, wink, nudge, nudge." Grandpa and a few dozen other married men used to go up to an isolated roundabout in a local park, they called it the Fruit Loop, and get busy in the bushes. Half of the fathers on my mom's street growing up were apparently in the Fruit Loop Club. Anyway, the whole thing got exposed. Grandma served him divorce papers. He unsuccessfully attempted tragic end. But things were mostly calmed down, and Grandma was remarried by the time I was born, so I didn't know any of it. I suspected, and he vehemently denied, but only got confirmation when we were moving Grandpa into hospice, and my uncle, who is blind, told me to go in a specific dresser drawer and destroy everything in it. I did my duty and didn't look too hard at anything, but yeah, he was a great grandfather and I miss him dearly. I'm glad he had my mom because otherwise I wouldn't exist. But I do wish he'd felt comfortable being himself before he died. Story 11. The reason my dad's brother doesn't talk to him is that while my dad was married to his high school sweetheart, he had an affair with his brother's girlfriend, my mom. The reason my mom didn't speak to her sister for several years is that after my mom caught my dad having his 1,000th estimate affair, her sister said, "That is how you got him." There's also been some weird shoot hinted about between my aunt, mom's sister, and 2 of my uncles, neither her brother. One is my dad's brother. The other is her other sister's husband. Story 12. At the end of my dad's life, he lost a lot of capacity, and in some of his more lucid moments, that meant he was mostly there but had zero filter. That's how I found out my mom's oldest brother had been accused of molesting his oldest daughter and was required to move out of his family home while the investigation took place. My dad believed he'd done it and talked about struggling and fighting with my mom to not let her brother near us. But my mom and her whole family supported my uncle. He lived with his parents for the duration. My mom refused to cut him off or keep him away. Eventually, my cousin recanted her claims and my uncle moved back in and everyone pretended everything was fine. My cousin was always regarded as troubled, an outcast by most of that side of the family. For context, my uncle has always been weirdly touchy. The first time I ever understood it was weird or felt weird about it was at my high school graduation party when I was talking to some friends of mine and my uncle came up behind me and started rubbing my shoulders. I didn't know who it was but saw my friends' faces drop and twist. After my dad revealed the story, my mind was flooded with memories of my touchy uncle. I still don't know what really happened. I don't remember if his behavior was or was not appropriate with me or other kids. But it did set my mind on one thing. Peace at all costs only protects abusers and creeps, and I was never going to be complicit like my family. I've never been able to bring myself to ask my mom about it. Answer: it sickens me that the family often are "nah, he didn't do it," and completely discount what the alleged victim is saying. But your dad? He believed her. And it seems like this situation troubled him his entire life if he was thinking about it at the end of his life. Do you have any contact with the cousin? If you do, it might mean a lot to her to hear he believed her right to the very end. We have a weird kind of situation in ours where my dad's oldest sister moved away as soon as she was old enough. Would come back to visit the parents from time to time. More after her dad died. But there was a noticeable geographical and emotional distance between her and her dad, my grandpa, who was a harsh disciplinarian on her brothers. I asked my dad, have none of you asked what caused this distance and made her essentially flee? But they haven't. I said he should ask. Maybe she dislikes seeing how hard he was on her brothers. Maybe he was hard on her too. I secretly wonder if it was something worse and she's waiting to be asked and be believed. Story 13. There's a family member who has more money than other family members. Other family members basically formed a team to dislike the family member because the family member wouldn't give them money. It just showed me how money can ruin relationships easily. Answer: a family doesn't even have to have money for money to rip them apart. My mother, who is by all accounts a miracle, considering her upbringing and siblings, has been helping her mom with end-of-life preparations. And the only fudge thing her stupid hick siblings have done to help is harass her constantly about setting up the will certain ways so that they can continue to mooch of the tiny bit my grandmother has left. The sibling who lives on the property was not the one helping with end-of-life care. She's literally just there to sit around like a goddamn leech-vulture hybrid, lest anyone try to fight her for the slum house and acre of nothing that's doomed to be lost to debts anyway. Story 14. My dad's parents never talked about their childhoods. Years later, I got into genealogy. I found the passing certificates for my grandparents. Grandpa's mom committed tragic end in 1922, leaving behind 7 children. Grandma's mom died in 1919 from complications of an abortion. Both were married to alcoholics. It explained a lot about my grandparents' behavior. My grandfather was very good to my grandmother. I suspect he was determined to not treat his wife the way his mother was treated. My grandmother was 3 when her mother died. I'm pretty sure her childhood was horrible, and she was definitely a mess. Answer: I don't know if it flipped my views, but it made me really sad and put me off genealogy for a while. It doesn't escape me that lack of birth control was a factor in both deaths. My grandmother, who left 7 children, also had at least 4 children die in early childhood or infancy. My other grandmother had 2 preschoolers and a toddler when she got an abortion. Of course, in 1919, abortions were very dangerous. How might things have been different if they'd had access to birth control? Story 15. I overheard my dad, multiple times, joking with his buddies about how he doesn't get any, and my mom doesn't put out. I brought it up to her once, after he died, and she rolled her eyes. She told me that they didn't have intimacy for nearly 8 years, because my dad's arthritis got so bad, he told my mom he never wanted to have intimacy again because it was too painful for him. The whole thing was on him, but there he was, running his mouth to his friends. Story 16. My mom has a sister I didn't know about until I was 16. I found a school picture of a girl named Kathy, and my grandma snatched it away from me and said, "She's nobody." Asked my mom, and she had a full meltdown, told me it's her older sister from my grandma's first marriage who hasn't had anything to do with them for years. told my grandma off and disappeared from their lives. I wish her well. My grandma is a rotten human being, and my mom isn't much better. Story 17. This will probably get buried, but since you asked. Trigger warning, this is pretty gruesome. In 2006, my dad, who was a severe alcoholic, was sent to prison for voluntary manslaughter. The victim was my grandmother, his mother. I was told that he'd pushed her and she hit her head when she fell. I believe this because, despite my dad's addiction, he was never really violent. Plus, he only served about 5 years for manslaughter, so surely it couldn't have been anything like takedown, right? Wrong. A few years after he was released, my dad forwards an email he'd received from my mom, which said, "Unlike the Menendez brothers, you used your bare hands." He CC'd my mom on this email so she could see that he sent it to me. My mom, bless her little heart, still hadn't quite figured out the difference between reply and reply all. So she responds to his email thinking she's only responding to him. She tells him about how she'd been protecting me from the truth all these years, that my cousin had read the autopsy report, and how my aunt and uncle had told her to tell me what actually happened, but she didn't want me to know. I immediately realized there was more to the story than had been told. And when I saw the line about the autopsy report, it occurred to me that it's a public record I could easily obtain. So I drove down to the medical examiner's office and got it. Turns out, my dad had actually strangled my grandmother to passing while blackout tipsy. I was shocked. My dad gave his attorney permission to give me all the other documents related to the case. I met up with this attorney and was given a massive stack of paperwork, police reports, court transcripts, even crime scene photos. He was originally charged with takedown, but took a plea deal for voluntary manslaughter, aka a crime of passion, hence the very short prison sentence. So yeah, that was definitely the biggest family secret that I found out by accident. This all happened over a decade ago, and while I've mostly come to terms with it, it definitely still fudged with my head. The biggest problem with secrets is that they're not very good at staying secret. Story 18. My parents got divorced in the 70s. I learned through a chance discovery many years later that my father was cheating on my mother at that time. My mother's next husband was a hideous, corpulent, embarrassing, illiterate redneck. I much later learned that she had had a child by this person before she met my father. It's so strange, because she was so much better than this vile character in every single way. I later learned that my mother's brother had encouraged the then young fat redneck to pursue my mother, out of malice towards her. My uncle is a malevolent freak. Story 19. My 3 times great-grandfather knocked up the 13-year-old from the farm down the holler. After they married, she died, giving birth to their second child at 16. He then proceeded to knock up and then marry her little sister, who was 13 at the time. The second one is my 3 times great-grandmother. This was rural Kentucky in the 18-somethings, so I don't know how shocking that actually was. Answer: I heard that it was not uncommon for the parents of the female that died have her sister marry the widow. It is thought that she would raise the surviving children like her own, whereas a woman from outside the family may not treat them right. It also helped to ensure that the maternal family was in the picture. I have done my family genealogy, and I have seen this play out quite a bit in my family tree. And sadly, I have seen young women married as young as 13 also to men in their 30s. I have one family line that the man married 3 sisters after the 2 died. Then he died, and his brother that was a widow married his brother's widower. Story 20. I don't know about whole view on life or even secret. Our grandmother was a scold, an uptight, prissy snob. Our table manners were never good enough. She didn't want us to be left-handed. She looked down on the unwashed masses. As children, we instinctively disliked her and thought nothing more about it. When I was 40, I learned that she grew up in downstate IL, almost Kentucky, on a work farm halfway house. Her family owned the farm and was paid by the county to take in the infirm, the mentally ill, felons from jail, anybody who would end up in the poorhouse. This was her world as a toddler, and she learned to differentiate herself so as not to be mistaken for just another end-of-the-roader. This taught me people are the way they are for a reason. Still, didn't like her. Story 21. That my uncle, who was a pastor in Indiana, died in a car crash. His car went over a bridge into a river. Turns out he faked his passing and was caught in Colorado with his mistress, the church secretary. Story 22. My mother lied to me my whole life about my dad. They split when I was 3, and I was told that he deserted us and wasn't paying child support, and that he never tried to get in touch. When he did start paying child support, and my mother won a legal case for back payments, she blew through $25,000 on, we still don't know what. When I was a teen, she would show me receipts for child support payments under 20 as an excuse for why we were so poor. 20 years later, when we sat down to reconnect, he showed receipts, returned sealed letters, and the divorce judgment stating I was supposed to spend summers with him and get to see him on other holidays. Those 20 child support payments, they were beyond what was required by the state, and the state chose to send them separately. So she would hide the fact that he was actually paying, and paying extra to try to manipulate me further. Turns out he was the stable, same parent, and I didn't get to find out until after